Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. It's a delight to see you all and to welcome you to this space. I'm the Reverend Jill Olds, the director of the Yale Youth Ministry Institute here at Yale Divinity School. The YMI is very pleased to welcome all of you to today's webinar entitled Belonging with Dr. Margaret Clark. This is our third gathering for this year's lecture series, which we've coined Thriving, Not Surviving, building a toolkit for a flourishing youth ministry in 2021 to 2022. We are excited to be offering opportunities to hear from speakers who have taken what the past year or two has been and have used it to inform and transform their work with young people. In this year, we will hear about Sacred Story, about children's ministries, and about engaging in anti-racism work with youth. Each of our presenters brings a unique perspective and experience, all of them holding a piece to the puzzle that will help us answer the question, how can my youth ministry not just survive, but actually thrive? We will be virtual through the end of this year, and our hope is to return to hybrid offerings with an in-person component in the spring, pending Yale's protocols for large in-group gatherings. So please do stay tuned as those details unfold. Welcome again to those of you who have joined us before. A special welcome to those of you who are joining our community today for the first time. We are very glad to have you with us. We span different time zones and continents, and we're so grateful that you took time out of your schedule to be with us today. For our time today, Dr. Clark will speak to us and we'll conclude with a final Q&A time. Please remain muted throughout the session, but we'll be monitoring the chat window. So if you have questions, please do type them in there at any time during the presentation. Our office has a great staff. I'd like to introduce them quickly and thank them for their work. We fall under the purview of the Center for Continuing Education at YDS. So we have Kelly Morrissey, the Managing Director for the Center of Continuing Ed. And we're blessed to have Megan Lukens, our Communications Coordinator. Thanks to both of you for all that you do and for who you are. If you are new to the YMI, we invite you to peruse our website when you get a chance. That's YaleYouthMinistryInstitute.org. We have so many resources on there, and I feel a little bit like a broken record when I share this with you all who have heard me give this spiel before, but we have a lot on there, and it's a helpful reminder to all of us. We have youth ministry curricula, training modules for youth leaders, discussion forums, over 1,000 video clips and lectures given by leading youth ministry experts, COVID era resources, some tips for resilience with youth, anti-racism work with youth, links to other resources, and all of our offerings are available for free. So please do check out our website. We also want you to mark your calendars for our upcoming events. Our next offering for this school year will be on Wednesday, December 1st at 12 p.m., at which time we will welcome Mark Yaconelli. Mr. Yaconelli is an author, a retreat leader, a spiritual director, and a story catcher. And he will speak to us about the sacred practice of storytelling with youth, listening to youth's stories and helping them share their stories with one another and with others. Please do consider joining us then on Wednesday, December 1st. A link to that registration can be found on our website, in our email newsletter, and in our chat window. And if you're not connected in any of those ways, please do drop me an email or Megan Lukens an email. Our info is on the website. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce all of you to Dr. Clark. Dr. Margaret Clark is the John M. Musser Professor of Psychology, head of Trumbull College, and most recently, the Dean of Academic Affairs at Yale College. She is an experimental social psychologist with additional interests in personality. Her published works are numerous and have a particular focus on optimal intra- and interpersonal functioning, close relationships with the social functions of emotion and the intersection of those two areas of interest. The concept of community and relationships are teased out to focus on themes, and among them, the role that emotions play in relationship building. Today, she has come to speak to us about how these themes come to bear in the field of youth ministry. Dr. Clark, welcome. We are so glad to have you.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me. And One role that I have, or one former role that I had that's salient to me today is I grew up in Connecticut, although I spent a good deal of my professional life in Pennsylvania. But I grew up in Connecticut and vividly remember being a member of a youth group myself at the Middlebury Congregational Church in Connecticut. And one of the things the minister there did was bring us down to Yale. And at the time, this is going to reveal my age. He had us listen to William Sloane Coffin, and he had us listen to William Buckley, both of whom were his friends. And I only recently found out that's because they were all simultaneously members of Skull and Bones. But it was that youth group at that church was very valuable to me. And I hadn't thought about it in years and years, but I'm thinking about it today. So what I'm going to do is talk about some recent work on the idea of belonging and where it comes from, where a sense of belonging comes from. This is new work. I'm going to give some examples of studies we've done, but I haven't built into these slides some other work we've done. For instance, how styles of parenting influence feelings of belonging. So if there's time at the end and people want to talk about that, I'm happy to do that. Okay, no, first, I did not, oops. I've got to share my screen first. You can see after months, now years of teaching online, I'm still haven't gotten this straight. Okay. All right, can everybody see that? All right, so what I'm going to do is talk about the topic of belonging, what makes people feel like they belong. And it's worth it to start out by saying what I think of belonging as being. It's just a feeling that one does belong socially, that one is accepted, that one's valued by other people. It involves not feeling rejected or fearful of rejection and not feeling lonely. So that's the kind of broad definition. And my slides are not advancing. There we go. So surprisingly, social psychologists, I'm a social psychologist, haven't thought about this for very long. Again, this shows my age because I say they haven't thought about it for very long, even though there are a couple of decades of research on it. In 1995, two people, Roy Baumeister, Mark Leary, published a paper, I was a reviewer on it, about the need to belong. And this paper has since received over 26,000 citations. I don't think the news that people need to belong or want to belong with other people is really actually going to be news to any of you. I think we know it as people. What was surprising is psychologists didn't focus on it, largely because they were really focused on individuals and individual functioning and not putting that individual functioning in social context. So in that paper, how did they define it? In that paper, they talked about one way to belong. And it involves establishing mutually caring, communal, highly interdependent relationships. So these are often exemplified by family relationships, romantic partners, friendships. And these are the relationships I've spent a career studying. These relationships involve people assuming some responsibility for each other's welfare. They can be asymmetrical as a parent with a newborn child, but they're usually symmetrical relationships where each person assumes some responsibility, some special responsibility for the other person's welfare. And then they're responsive to that other person's welfare. They indicate understanding, accepting, caring when the need for such actions occur. So when the other person has a need or desire, they're responsive to the person. Very important to me early on was that this responsiveness was non-contingent, meaning it wasn't contingent. You don't respond to a partner because they just did something for you, or you don't respond to a partner because you expect something specific in return. I call those transactional relationships or exchange relationships, but rather your responsibility is to attend to needs if and when they arise. And Baumeister and Leary said, this is establishing these relationships is how you come to belong. So you establish these relationships, you feel belonging, you feel acceptance. These are communal relationships, so that's what I've always called them, the cooperative relationships involving responsiveness, it's non-contingent. They are often, but not always, exemplified by friendships, romantic relationships, and family relationships. There are friendships that don't involve, that are called friendships by the people involved, that don't involve this at all. So two people who say, always play tennis together or go to shows together, but are not particularly responsive to each other's needs. That wouldn't be a communal relationship, but it might be called a friendship. And I remember when I first talked about these relationships, a colleague at University of Rochester saying, oh, my family doesn't operate that way. And he gave me an example of his mother keeping track of every wedding present that was given to him and to his wife. And then she kept that list. And when the other people's children were married, she'd give them a comparable gift. If they didn't give her son a gift, she wouldn't give them a gift. That's very transactional. So these relationships often, but don't always, exemplify communal relationships. If you, in 1979, shortly after I entered the field, which was not considered an area of research that anyone should enter in social psychology, Senator William Proxmire in Wisconsin said, we don't want to study loving relationships. We should leave that to poets and novelists. Scientists should stay out of it. And after he did that and awarded some golden fleece awards for wasting taxpayers' money on this kind of research, research funding dried up. And then shortly thereafter, some epidemiologists who were trying to predict mental and physical health did some gigantic studies that showed really clearly that after controlling for existing health, diet, exercise, smoking, health habits, gender, age, that having close relationships were huge predictors of better mental health and better physical health, controlling for all those other things. And then all of a sudden, the National Institutes of Health and National Science Foundation thought it was worth studying them. That was good for me. So in terms of belonging, for decades, people thought this was the only route to feeling like you belonged and you were accepted. And I don't disagree with that. But recently, along with one of my PhD students, who's now a lecturer at Yale, Jennifer Hirsch, we thought more broadly about this and how people who feel a need to belong, who feel lonely, what do they actually do to achieve a sense of belonging? Ideally, they try to form and sustain these relationships, but not everybody pulls that off. And there are other ways that they pursue a sense of belonging. So here's a second way that we found to be very interesting, is you can present oneself to the wider social world, not necessarily your close friends, but as someone who's very accomplished. You can win an athletic award. You can get all A's in school. You can be put on the top soccer team. You can have the best possessions. You could, I have a picture here of someone taking a selfie. Another way to gain, fame in this way would be you can show that you're associated with important, well-known people, that you sit with the popular kids at lunch. And this is a route some people take to achieve belonging. It involves feeling like you're admired by a large number of people, and other people would want to be you and would want to associate with you. Notice it doesn't involve any mutual caring, mutual support. So that's a second way we thought people might strive to belong. And it's not just a way that, say, students strive to belong, but it's sometimes a way that parents relate to their children, that they feel close to their children when their children achieve success in school or athletics. And they praise their children for doing that. And then the child, in turn, feels that that's what they need to do for their parents to be happy. That would be the parent striving to belong through how the child reflects on them. Okay, so that's a second way that can contribute to felt belonging and acceptance. And I gave you some examples of this: getting all A's, winning athletic competitions, being seen with the right people, having the right possessions, physical beauty too. You can base your sense of acceptance on being, the most beautiful person in your class. And of course, this doesn't work for everybody because not everybody gets all A's or is athletic or is beautiful. A third and still distinct way of achieving a sense of belonging is being a member of groups. So this is merely being a member. Of course, you could have friendships within these groups, but you're on the right team. You belong to the right country club. And you're a part of the group, and that alone can make you feel like you belong. One way this manifests itself that relates to diversity is if you're a member of the majority group, say if most people in your school are white and you are white and similar to those people, that itself can provide a sense of belonging that you're a member of the group. Whereas if you're in a minority group within the larger group, then you don't necessarily sense that you belong. I think I see this in my own students who come to Yale. Some of the low-income students, some of the Black students will say, I don't feel like I belong here. And I think this is what they mean. I'm not like most of the other people who are here. So that can contribute to belonging. And these are all separate. Okay, so being selected for a team, the right club, and so forth. A fourth way we found contributes to a sense of belonging is by engaging in really superficial, minor, pleasant social interactions day to day. So this would involve, you get on the shuttle bus and say hello pleasantly to the driver, who says hello pleasantly back. When you go into a store, you engage in pleasantries with the person behind the counter. When you walk on campus, you wave to someone or nod to them. And these small ways seem to contribute to, small interactions seem to contribute to a sense of belonging as well. Let me describe just one little study that I thought was interesting that was done, where people went out on a campus like Yale's, and there was a Confederate who just simply passed people on pathways on the campus. And they did one of two things. They either looked at the person they were passing in the eye and nodded, that was it, and passed, or they looked over the person's shoulder. So it was clear they weren't looking at the person, they looked over the person's shoulder, they didn't do anything wrong. The people who were passed were then stopped by a researcher who said they were doing a study on belonging, and they just wanted to get a sense on a real quick questionnaire how much people felt like they belonged socially. And that simple manipulation of being looked in the eye and someone nodding at you significantly increased a sense of belonging. So that too can contribute to belonging. All of these routes to belonging do increase belonging in the moment, and there are lots of studies that show that they do. All right, so then after Jennifer and I published that paper on 4 routes to belonging and made an argument that we should study them in interaction with each other, something that I'll tell you about in a minute, Another professor here actually said, you should read Shira Gabriel's work. She's a professor at SUNY Buffalo, and I did. And she also was studying a fifth way of belonging, and it's engaging in fictional worlds.
Sent the email with the.
Okay, so it's the fifth way of belonging is engaging in fictional worlds. So it could be watching a movie, it could be reading a novel, or it could be something that a lot of students do now is engaging in virtual worlds and games where they're actually imaginary social settings that you can involve yourself in. I myself, as a youth, spent lots and lots of time reading books. And the argument that Shira made is that human beings just are built to belong. That a guy at University of Virginia says that's our baseline, that's what we expect. And that these fictional worlds can make us feel as if we belong, that we're a part of them. We can get immersed in them. And by reading books, watching movies, especially favorite movies or shows, you feel like you actually belong. And there's research on that shows that, yeah, in the moment, doing something as simple as watching your favorite TV show or reading an engaging novel does make people feel like they belong. They really do feel like they're a part of that world. Of course, as soon as the book is shut, that might go away. Okay, so I put up 5 routes to belonging here, and that's quite different from what Baumeister and Leary said early on. And we became interested in how these things interact. And before I go on, I should say Shira Gabriel also has a 6th one that I haven't studied, and that's forming what she calls parasocial relationships, where you have a favorite movie star or that you don't know, or a favorite football team you don't know, but the fact that you're a fan of this person or this group makes you feel like you have some kind of relationship with them. There's evidence that too works. Okay, so they all seem to be driven by a need to belong. You can measure a need to belong with simple questionnaires. You can ask people if they're lonely, if they feel a need to belong, if they want to have a greater sense of belonging than they have. And people seem to answer pretty honestly. And all these routes to belonging seem to work in the moment. So some people, like Shira, think of belonging now using a gas tank analogy. You can be on empty and feel like you just don't belong. And you need to fill up that tank with ways of belonging. And if you read her work, she says you could use any of these. You can techniques. You just have to do enough to feel like you really belong. She does not differentiate them and say that one way of belonging is more important than the other. And that gave us pause because we suspect they're not, and I'll show you some evidence of it, they're not equivalent. So I just gave an example of a technique that may work in the moment, but may not be good for the long run, and that's immersing oneself in fictional worlds. It does seem to work when you feel lonely. Lots of people sit down and watch a TV show or read a book. There's nothing harmful in that, but then the show ends. Or you close the book and you may go back to feeling lonely. So it didn't seem to us to be something that would work in the long run. The same thing goes with pleasant interactions. They probably work in the moment, but do they produce an enduring sense? Most important to me is the question of whether they work in good times and bad. So I was became especially interested in achievement, and partly from observing my own students at Yale. So achievement's great. It does lead to people admiring you and wanting to be associated with you. And it works great. It's worked great for many Yale students. After all, they got into Yale, and they get admired for doing that and praised for doing that by parents, sometimes by their peers. I'll get into when they aren't admired for that. But if you think about it, it only works so long as you keep up that achievement. That's a lot of stress to put on yourself. If you fail, sometimes I see really talented athletes come here to Yale. It's not uncommon for them to get injuries, which stops their participation in whatever sport they're in. Then what happens to them? When people aren't cheering, can they maintain a sense of belonging? It seems to me this is a stressful and fragile way to achieve a sense of belonging. So, so I thought, well, that's watching TV is a momentary thing. Achievement is fragile because it only works if you can keep up that achievement. And maybe there's something very special about the close relationships, the friends, the family, the romantic relationships. If they really are relationships where people are supportive of one another, it should work in good times and bad. So in good times, you get all A's, and your parents praise you, your friends are impressed. Ideally, people take you out to lunch to celebrate. And so it's great to have that kind of support in good times because you can capitalize on it. People will capitalize on it for you. And that's great, but it also works in bad times. So when you don't get into the college you wanted to get into, or you aren't accepted in a group, you don't make the team, if you have responsive friends and family, then they're there for you. And that's something unique to forming those close relationships. All the other routes to belonging don't really provide that. So I don't think it's this simple. And I think how one strives to belong matters. And the combination of ways one uses to strive to belong matters as well. So now I'm going to tell you about some very simple studies that we did during the pandemic, with students at Yale. During the pandemic, our lab was closed. Everybody's lab was closed. And so we couldn't do our normal sorts of studies where we bring people in and look at actual behavior. But we could do studies online, and I'm going to describe some of the ones we did. And I can describe some other ones as well later. So first, I'm going to describe 3 studies that were done by 2 undergraduates who were working with me. They both graduated, Abby Hopkins and Yasmin Almudine. And we were particularly interested in 2 routes to belonging: forming close relationships and going after general approbation, going after being admired by other people. So first, we measured people's need to belong with some simple questions. This is actually an established relationship that Baumeister and Leary came up with. They had 10 items. We threw out 6 of them because those other 6 assumed a particular way of belonging. Like they might say, I need to have friends. We picked just the ones that were very general. I have a strong need to belong. I want other people to accept me. I don't like being alone. And if other people don't seem to accept me, I don't let it bother me. That's reverse coded when these are added together. We also measured something quite different, which is achieved belonging. That's saying, I feel accepted. I have a strong sense of belonging. I feel connected with others. And then I feel like an outsider. That's reverse coded. So need for belong is wanting to belong. And we assume that is partially, in a large part, driven by feeling that you don't belong as much as you'd like to. And then achieve belonging. Okay, so we measured those. And then we measured striving to belong in different ways. I'm going to focus on close relationships and striving for approbation. We had a set of questions, many more than these questions, but for close relationships, I often seek out my close others for support. So it goes in both directions. I'm looking to people for support, my parents, my friends, my romantic partner. I often provide support to others. So you have the symmetry there. I try to just spend time with friends. There were items like that. And we looked at striving for approbation. I always want others to be impressed with me. I focus on getting good grades and awards. I want the others I spend time with to reflect positively on me. I'll look good if I hang out with admired people. You can also measure avoiding people who won't make you look good. Now, I should say these are not mutually exclusive. People can score high on both, low on both, high on one and low on the other. Seeking good grades does not necessarily mean you're not also seeking close friendships. So it's important to note that. All right, so we had measures of striving to belong through forming relationships or approbation. We had measures of need to belong and achieve belonging. And we wanted to look at how closely, how much people felt they had achieved belonging. Let me put up these. So the need to belong is closely more positive than numbers. The numbers can vary from -1, a correlation of -1, which means being high on one means being low on the other, or +1. So positive numbers mean if you're high on one thing, you're high on the other. So what these figures from two different studies mean is if you score high on need to belong, then you report striving to form those relationships. You're working at forming those relationships more in both studies. And you're also, if you feel a high need to belong, you're going after those A's. You really want to be on the right team. You really want to be sitting with the popular kids at the table. So feeling a high need to belong seems to drive striving for both of those things. What's interesting is if you look at this, the link with approbation, going after approbation is stronger. People who feel a strong need to belong go after others admiring them. That's especially likely to occur, but both things occur. What about achieved belonging? What does striving to belong in each way predict about achieved belonging? Well, if you go after close relationships, you're providing support for other people and you're seeking support from other people. That's linked pretty closely in both studies to feeling like I do belong. I feel like I belong. I feel accepted. And so that's great. That's why I put it in green. And what about going after general approbation? That's actually negatively related to achieve belonging. So people who feel a need to belong are especially likely to go after the all A's in the team. And it seems to backfire. And I'll get to why that might be the case. It seems not to work for them over the long run. So this is a simple correlational studies, things we were limited to in the pandemic. But then we went with Yasmin, we went further to do a slightly more sophisticated study. So what we did was we had students and we had them, actually these weren't students, these were community members generally. We involved them in what we call a daily diary study for 7 days. And they filled out questionnaires on all 7 days. On the first day, we collected measures of need for and achieved belonging. And then each day for 7 days, we collected daily measures of relationship striving and achievement striving. So there were 10 behaviors and they appeared on your phone at the end of the day, and you had to report on, did you do things like ask a friend to go to lunch with you? That would be in relationship striving. Seek support from a friend, give support to a friend. And there was achievement striving too. You might have entered a contest. You might have studied really hard. Again, the measures are independent of each other, except for limitations on one's time, of course. We collected both those measures. We waited a week, and then we measured achieved belonging again. So what we're especially interested in, because we're after causality now, is what predicts an increase in achieved belonging from time 1 to time 2, just 1 week, but we're controlling for achieved belonging at the beginning. We're looking at, for an individual person, how do your relationship strivings and achievement strivings affect how much you achieve belonging. So, okay. So what we found was that striving to belong through forming, maintaining, or strengthening close relationships during that week led to significant jumps in a sense of achieved belonging from the beginning of the week to the end. On the other hand, striving to belong through achievements had no impact on achieved belonging. It was slightly negative, but it was not a significant finding. But what worked were these, the relationship striving. Okay. So here's another question, and I'm going to stop it not too long, so that we can have some discussion. But we started thinking wait a minute, can striving to belong in one way interfere with striving to belong in another way? We know that forming mutually supportive relationships works to achieve belonging, but do other ways of striving to belong interfere with that? Now, in some ways, you say, of course, striving in one way will interfere with the other because we only have so much time. So we thought it pretty obvious that if you spent all day watching television, you don't have time for friends and family. So engaging, say, in fictional worlds, involving yourself in fictional worlds would interfere with forming close relationships. But we were interested, but we studied something a bit different, and this was done with Jennifer Hirsch. So our speculation was that seeking general approbation would interfere with close relationships in another way, in part due to time limitations, but in part because seeking general approbation involves competition with one's peers. So how do we know if we have the best possessions? The only way we know that we have the best possessions is look at other people's and see if ours are better. How do we know if we have the biggest house? You have to look at the houses around you. How do you know if your grades are great? You compare them to other people's grades. And the social comparison is something we all do, but we do it to greatly different extents. And when you compare with another person, we thought this will interfere with relationships, because although you'll feel good when you come out ahead, the person you're comparing with, say your roommate, is going to feel bad. They come out behind. So it's not good for both people in a relationship. And it really pits one person against another. So I think that, so what we did in this study was to look at how students reacted to their peers' successes and failures. The study's really simple. We measured individual differences in ways of striving to belong, seeking close relationships versus seeking fame and fortune. I say versus, I shouldn't say versus. I should say and, because you can do both. And here are some of the pathway items. I've shown you some similar ones before. I'm the type of person who works to understand and validate my close others. I think of myself as someone who depends on my close others for support. And seeking approbation, my sense of self is easily pushed around by how my close others are doing in life relative to how I'm doing. I want my other close others to make me look good. So we measured the individual differences, and then we had all our participants identify a particular friend. We didn't ask for their name, we asked for their initials because we wanted them to think of someone in particular, and we called them a friend. And we wanted them to vividly imagine the friend succeeding on an academic test, getting a very good grade, or failing, getting a very poor grade. And then we asked them right after they did that, and we're repeating this study now with actual friend successes, actual friends failures. And we just asked them after they finished task, we want to know how you feel right now after doing this task, after thinking about your friend succeeding or after thinking about your friend failing. So first, how did they feel after thinking about a friend succeeding? So positive numbers mean that they higher scores on happiness, excited, or proud. So if you look at these results, after people who were mutually caring, who strove for close relationships, said after thinking about their friend succeeding, they felt happy, excited, and proud. That's great. The friend would be happy about that. And they felt less sad and angry than would otherwise be the case. So that all seems good for relationships. What about those people who scored high in general approbation? Again, these varied independently. So the mutually caring results control for people's general approbation strivings, and the general approbation results control for the mutual caring findings. Here's what happened for general approbation after a friend succeeded. They felt less happy. I think that's because they're in competition with the friend. And there were no results for that says not significant for being excited or proud. They felt sad and they felt angry. Why did they feel sad? I think it's because they're in competition. If your friends did better than you did, then you actually feel sad for yourself. And why would you be angry? They're your friend. They probably reflect negatively on you in the sense that their good performance is making you look bad. And these were strikingly different results. And I think show that one method of striving to belong can interfere with the other. Now, I don't want to say that, seeking to do well academically is what's bad in and of itself. It's seeking to do well academically for extrinsic reasons so that you'll look good relative to other people. If you're just intrinsically interested in your work and you're not doing that social comparison, and perhaps you're even supporting your peers to do as well as you're doing, then it shouldn't be harmful. But this is an overall result. It shows that people really are doing it for extrinsic reasons. Okay, so what happens when your friend fails? How do you feel after your friend fails? Now, the people who pursue mutually caring relationships feel bad. They're not happy. They're not excited. They're not proud. That makes sense. There's no reason for them to be less proud, but they're not happy or excited. They are sad. They're not angry, so they're presumably not worried about how the person reflects on them. But what about what about general approbation? What does that predict? People are happy when when they think about their friend failing, significantly more happy. And they're also interestingly angry. So I think they're more happy because they will look good in comparison. And I think they're angry because their friend will reflect negatively on them. I think this is why parents are often angry if their child does poorly. I mean, the adaptive thing is to help the child in their studies. The maladaptive thing is to be angry at them. But I think the reason parents do get angry sometimes is that it reflects negatively on them. So I'm going to stop there. Let me tell you, we've done other studies too, and you can tell I'm interested in parenting as well as relationships between students. But I want to stop there with these summary points and leave time for some discussions. The summary points are just, I do think we're all social creatures who really need to belong to survive and to thrive. There's plenty of research that supports that. Our need to belong drives at least 5 different types of behavior, differentially in different people. They all appear to work in the moment, but my overall sense is having these supportive relationships is probably the most effective and enduring pathway to belonging. And the reason is that it works in good times and in bad. It works when you succeed and your friends and family and romantic partners celebrate for you and are proud of you and are excited for you. And it works in bad times when you fail and they are supportive and help you adjust to whatever the failure is, find a different thing that you might be interested in when you get an athletic injury and you can no longer be the star on the soccer team. They'll help you find something else to do. And I do think that striving to belong in some ways may interfere with achieving belonging in other ways. I don't think we're particularly aware of it. I don't think the students who constantly compare themselves with one another and feel good and admired because they are outdoing other people, I think they feel good. I think parents who have high achieving students feel good and compare their child to other children. But I don't think that people are very aware of how it actually influences how it can harm a sense of belonging. I think I see that sometimes in my own students who come to Yale. They're very high achieving to get in here in the first place. And of course, some people succeed here and some people fail here. And then you see sometimes parents arrive on campus and you see how they react to their child. I think the communally caring parents are with the kids who fail. They're here for them. They're supportive. They're say, well, we'll get you back on the right track. And they're not angry. But there are other parents who arrive when their child fails in some way or another, and they're angry. And they say things like, "How could you do this to me?" So it's not about their child, it's about their own need for approbation. And I'm very interested in those things. And I think they may happen particularly at a place like Yale, where to get here, very dependent on achieving a lot. So I'm going to stop sharing now and see what other people think or what questions they might have.
Dr. Clark, thank you so much for that. And folks, as we get started into some Q&A time, please feel free to throw some questions into the chat. We have a couple that I'll lift up. The first is a clarifying question. Someone is wondering who the researcher was for this topic. You mentioned it in the second study that you showed to us.
Okay, the second study. So the researchers for the studies always involve me. But the students were a student who graduated 2 years ago, Abby Hopkins, and a second student who graduated last year, Yasmin Almdeen.
Thank you. And Denise Terry wrote, she's curious about sharing this kind of information with young people. So are there activities or role plays or discussion topics that might help convey this information to youth?
Yeah, thinking about talking today made me think about just that. And I think it is possible to talk about this. Well, I think I talk about it with my own students. I mean, I think you don't want to tell students not to achieve. That's, that's a key to lots of future things in life. So it's more about talking about social comparison and how you evaluate your own achievement, and whether you're in competition with peers or not. Because I don't think you have to be in competition. I think anything that can decrease. I'll tell you one thing I say to my own incoming first-year students. They all competed away to get here. And yet, once they get here, one thing I say to them, you're all here. You all got in. You're all good. And you have different interests. Okay. Some of you are becoming musicians. Some of you are going to go to law school. So you're going to do different things. You love different things. There's really no need to compare. You can all achieve a lot in your own domains. And you can, I actually, let people know, sometimes it's great to form friendships with someone doing something very different than you. The engineering student, actually I have studies of this from a different university, the engineering student who's roommates with the drama student, by chance, they're random assigned, they get along better. Why? Because they're not competing, and the drama student gets the lead in the play, and it's easy for the engineering student to celebrate for them. They didn't want the lead in the play. And the same thing with the engineering award, and they're not in the same classes. So you can kind of, you can think about forming friendships with people who are really excelling in different ways. It's hard because where do you spend your time? You play soccer and you spend time with all the other soccer players. You're in the math club and you're spending time with all the other math people. So you have to do something more than that. And I think it's really about you're talking about the comparison and why do that? And the idea that both people can be good in math. Both people can be good in soccer. So just bringing what's really going on to the fore, and talking, I think most students would probably understand that they sometimes revel in other people's failures and just like, what's that about? I think you can talk about it. Changing it is, I think families of origin have a lot to do with whether kids are doing a ton of social comparison. They do it sometimes. And so talking with parents might be really useful because I think they explicitly do compare with other children. And if they could stop, that would be very helpful. So
I've often heard it said that youth ministry would be the easiest job in the world if not for the parents. And now being a parent, I can say that with a little bit more humility. But yeah. Someone wondered, and I think this is part and parcel to what you were just saying. I wonder how vulnerability is related to belonging. Are there studies related to this topic?
So yeah, you have to think about what vulnerability means. My answer is yes, but I should, if the questioner is still on the call, I might ask, what do you mean by vulnerability?
Yeah, Kelly, if you want to unmute yourself.
So
I guess when I think about vulnerability, I'm thinking about the ways that I resist it personally, and the ways that trauma impacts that resistance, and then how that works with the kind of enduring sense of belonging that you're describing.
Yeah, if you think about trauma, and as if trauma involved you not being taken care of or you being actively harmed in the past, that really undermines trust in other people generally. And that in turn really, it's enduring, unfortunately, really undermines the ability to seek help from other people and even to offer it, because people have endured big traumas. What do they learn from that? I can't count on other people. I have to be independent. And it really undermines the ability to form these close relationships. And so there was a really interesting study I listened to recently that showed that people from really tough backgrounds who have strived for success and make it to college, their mental health is actually pretty good, as long as they continue to succeed, and their physical health takes a huge toll. And that was recent work I just myself listened to a talk on. So I think those people are vulnerable. They're vulnerable because they've become fiercely independent because they felt like they had to become fiercely independent. And then they have that additional vulnerability now. I've got to succeed. I don't have the relationships to fall back on. I can't trust other people. So they often do succeed. You know, I see lots of students here do that. But they're so fiercely independent that they're high stress. I think that's why they take a hit in their physical health. They don't sleep as well as other students. So how to deal with that? I mean, they really need people around them that are consistently caring, and it takes forever. But merely coming from like a low, like I look at my full financial age students, and I see two things. They are both some of the people that stumble the most and some of the people that succeed the most. So the success part is really interesting to me. They're coming from supportive families. They didn't have many resources. But one thing that I'm seeing, this is just my experience being head of a college, is that they're the ones who growing up not only received care from their families, they had to give it. They had to help take care of siblings. They had an after-school job. They did the laundry. And those are mutually supportive relationships. And that serves them very well in college. They're not really terribly upset when their mother, I remember one student, the mother couldn't come to see this big fancy performance. Everybody else's parents were there. And she said to me, well, she's working. Of course she can't come. I wouldn't expect her to come. And so it's not sort of the low socioeconomic status. It's what happened in the family in that. So those people, I think, are less vulnerable than some of my other students whose families' entire life focused around their success. They're vulnerable because what if they don't succeed? If they don't succeed, they fail their family as well as themselves. And if they fail, it's terrible. The kids that are more, where things went more both ways, they seem more resilient to me. I haven't done the research, but I think we would do well by looking at types of vulnerability. So trauma is definitely one, but another one is your entire family's happiness is resting on your academic success. that's a vulnerability. So anyway, that's too long an answer.
Really interesting answer though. Thank you. Yeah. We have one other question right now on competition. And so along similar veins, and then I'd like to move us into a conversation a little bit about spirituality. But for now, Jonathan wrote, I wonder how the self-esteem movement has affected our competition-driven sense of belonging. I had a professor who said the shortest path to a high self-esteem is on the backs of other people around you. Yeah, so and it dovetails into a wondering I had, which is we often hear touted having healthy competition, right? Making this a part of our culture and a part of youth's culture, teaching them what that means and teamwork and all those things. Is that true? Is there such a thing?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, the teamwork is mutual support. So that sounds good. And you know, I don't think all competition is bad. I mean, I think, you know, I play tennis every week. I'm not that good, but I want to win. But I think I think you have to think about how much in the moment. You know, I don't feel terrible when I lose. I feel good when I win, but it's not the basis of my relationship with the people I play with. So I don't have a good answer to that, but I think about thinking about what's healthy competition and what's unhealthy competition, and digging into that a little bit. And even I don't have the right answer, but I could see easily talking to a group of students about that question. What do they think? What do their peers think? Might be a very good thing to do. That I don't, and getting there on the backs of other people, that just makes me cringe. You know, so.
Yeah, it's quite a
But it
quote.
probably makes sense. I don't know. Some people may think that's great, but obviously the professor did.
Or stating an observation. Yeah, yeah. I have a question, shifting gears a bit. How does spirituality play into the science of belonging? Many of us work in either church cultures or faith communities of some kind. And something I often say with my youth is our sense of identity is not designed to come from what we do, but it is who we are as beloved children of God, made in God's image. And there's a sense of belonging in that is meant to be modeled by the belonging in a church community. But I'm curious to hear from a more clinical perspective, you know, what role does religion or spirituality play into this conversation?
Wow. Oh, okay. So this is something I haven't thought much about, but certainly those spiritual groups are groups. I didn't talk much about that. Was a way to belong, but that sense of sharing common beliefs, sharing common purpose, I would think would be, you know, enhance a sense of belonging. And the who we are part seems important to me too. But I'd have to, it's a really interesting question. I do know that in the big epidemiological studies, the people who are groups, are members of spiritual groups, no question, they're mentally and physically healthier. And that I think part of it is being part of a group, part of it is just your own identity, that you are part of that. But I got to think more. This is good for me.
Yeah, it's something that I wonder about a lot. If our belonging is in something greater than ourselves, what does that lead to in terms of our well-being, our emotional, mental, spiritual, physical well-being? Yeah.
Yeah, if it's greater than yourself, see, social comparison and doing better than somebody else is very individualistic.
Mm.
So if it should move you away from being very individualistic, and that should reduce that. Not everybody does socially compare. When people feel comfortable and they feel like they belong, they compare less.
Yeah. Well, and thinking slightly differently about that, I wonder if this looks different depending upon what country you're coming from. The United States is a very individualistic culture. Cultures are not. Other cultures are much more communally minded and think about the good of the community before we in the United States are I think, indoctrinated to. So thinking about that, again, being a part of something beyond yourself, and being responsible in some ways, as you shared, to others in your actions leads to kind of a different definition of belonging.
Yeah, so all the studies that I've done are not cross-cultural, but you are absolutely correct. It's we're one of the most individualistic societies in the world.
Yeah.
But I would expect, like, the success failure study might look very different in a different culture.
Yeah. Someone asked a question, and I'll preface this. Are you familiar with the Enneagram tool, Dr. Clark? It's an old spiritual tool.
Okay.
Let's hang on to that one, folks. But I think if other people in the chat want to consider answering this question, there's a wondering about whether there's research considering a person's Enneagram number and their preferred way of belonging. I think that could be a whole separate webinar, which would be very, very interesting. Where we're coming from and our sense of identity and how we belong is related to that. So keep the conversation flowing that way if you feel inclined. Another person asked, named, I organize a group of high school students who serve on a committee designing youth retreats. I think there's some level of belonging to the group, but how can I encourage them to develop those interpersonal relationships that lead to more enduring belonging?
Okay, yeah, that's it. Well, you know, that may, I remember going on retreats myself. I think it might naturally fall out of those things. You're spending time with other people, and you're part of a group with some shared values, and merely spending that time away from the other kinds of pressures that are more linked to competition. I think that alone, without doing any, without any encouragement other than setting up the event and the time, probably promotes those kinds of relationships, and deciding what topics one talks about, which could go in one of two directions. And, we talked about things that are harmful and things that are helpful, but the choice of topics themselves could promote the relationships. And I think kids grow up in very different kinds of families, and that's their world, and they don't understand that things operate differently in different families. So anytime you're a group, if you have another adult leader or you have a different group, it's just a chance, especially for kids that don't feel like they belong or think, or whose families may not operate optimally. It's a chance for them to see that other models of relating exist. And so that time to get away, to spend time, to be, I think is important. But just doing that, I think, is important with no particularly planful activity other than doing it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A few other questions about belonging. So Blake asks, does the sense of belonging carry over to other contexts or physical environments? If I feel a sense of belonging at Yale and then go home where I'm isolated or ignored and feel I don't belong, will that be mitigated by the knowledge that I felt I belonged to a community elsewhere, in this example at Yale?
Yes, the answer is yes to that. It does mitigate it. Although, we saw that sometimes a little effort in it. The pandemic was a really interesting situation where we had 23% of our students were not here. They were at home. And they maintained those contacts. Once the relationships are established, it's easier to maintain them, with Zoom calls, or, I had a case where I had 10 incoming students that didn't know anybody, but they connected with each other. They were all studying remotely. They found each other. So yeah, but one community can mitigate the other. And then people will gravitate to the ones that make them feel most comfortable. So, it's just as likely that people gravitate to Yale from families, or the reverse, that it's the family that's mitigating the stress and competition at Yale.
Belonging somewhere helps
Yeah.
with and overflows into our sense of well-being in general. Yeah, that makes sense. Someone is asking, how do we keep our eyes open for our youth who are feeling isolated and not welcome, as though they don't belong?
Yeah, I worry about that all the time. And literally just keeping your eyes open is one way to do it. You've got to have contact. So for me, I walk through that dining hall and I just pay attention to who's eating alone and who's eating with groups. So literally just keeping your eyes on things. During the pandemic, the dining hall was closed. I didn't have that. So one dilemma I always feel is that I can offer activities and events and things, and people will take me up on them, but I worry about the people who don't. I can offer support and help, but some people will take us up on it or not. One thing I found that works is when I came in, one of the person doing activities before had the idea of what the right activity for the college was, and breaking it down and saying, not everybody likes X, whether it was like a big football rally or something. And I found that I can connect with those people by dreaming up more and more activities, varies by year, that appeal to a small number of people. And then you pull in more people that were somewhat isolated. The people that will come to my cookie baking are different than the people who, we had a knitting group last year. We had a game group. We had, and those are different students than the students who participate, say, in intramural competitions. So just diversifying what we did. Some suggestions will flop, but we brought in grad affiliates and we said, look, do whatever, we'll support whatever activity you want to do. And what I found is that that diversity of activities and events is allowed me to connect to many, many more students. So study breaks at night, I'll get hundreds of people at 10 o'clock. Study breaks 6 a.m., I've got my group at 10, and they wouldn't be at that late night thing. So literally keeping your eyes open and just seeing, who's sitting alone, and then just figuring out ways to pull other students. They may be sitting alone, they don't want to talk to the old person necessarily. So you just dream up ways that, sometimes it's just asking for help for events in the house, and they'll come, they'll say yes, and then, and get involved. You just have to just always keep your eyes open, I think.
Be watchful.
Yeah.
Someone is asking a question and making some comments also about the engaging in fictional worlds piece that you mentioned. Synthesizing some of the comments into more of a question here. What is the distinction between when that act is a furtherance of belonging and when that can actually become more like a pathological kind of social withdrawal, especially when we're talking about virtual worlds and realities that can be quite dangerous for young people at times. So where's the line? When is this belonging, and when does this tip over into something else?
Well, yeah, we have to think of what we mean by belonging. To say that it increases a sense of belonging is not necessarily to say that that's good, because if it's so enticing that you don't venture out and do other things, then it can become pathological. So, it's really the degree. If it accompanies other ways, it's good. I mean, one thing that's great about fictional worlds is sometimes, close interpersonal relationships and being responsive is not always easy. It takes, first of all, it can be very effortful, as I've learned by watching my own 1-year-old grandchild. I love it, and it's exhausting. And it's also, you have to cede some control, because as soon as it's dyadic in nature, someone else has control over whether it works. You can invite someone to lunch and they could say no. So I think when fictional worlds are great, is like when you're just tired, and you just don't have the, energy to do something. I mean, there's really nothing. It could be quite good to read a book you feel like reading, or watch a movie. So it's really amount. Never doing that. Like if you spend all your time socializing and achieving, that could be really stressful. So I wouldn't want to say it's bad. I'd say it's pathological when it crowds out other things you need.
Having a balance.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
If reading a book is bad, I'm in trouble. So.
Add me to that group too. So I have a question. Your comment about being a member of a group and your words on that resonated with me in my work with teenagers. I think that's a really common route for middle schoolers and high schoolers to take. And I don't think that's unhealthy, but something that I have noticed is the shift in belonging and sense of belonging once those teenagers graduate and head off to college or to work. There's a loss there. You're not on the same team and your school. You aren't belonging to the same club, and you lose that sense of community that many youth grow up with for years. There's a big shift. Can you speak to the loss of that and perhaps what youth leaders might do to prepare their youth for this experience?
Yeah, the example of that I use, and I think there are many examples, is these athletic teams. They can spend years and years and years on it, and then they go to college, and that's lost for many of them, or an injury can make it, can lose it, or you can lose any kind of group. So I'm not sure. I mean, to some diversity in that before people head off, but it's hard because these activities, singing groups are another, example of that. They have become so competitive, intense. When I was growing up, you were in a different sport every season. That's not true now. If you're a swimmer, you're swimming year round. And so I don't, it's hard if you're comfortable in a group, it's hard. It's going to be almost impossible to pull someone out of the intense involvement, and maybe not at all functional, because if everybody else is swimming year round, and you're not, then you lose in that competition. So I think the intervention may have to come outside from the leadership of the group, from the adult leaderships of the group, so that the expectation isn't, every day, hours every day, every season being involved in that. We saw that here with the football team, which is large, and the coaches were like, you got to go to practices, you got to do this, you got to do that. You have to eat meals together. And they would approach the heads of the college and said, can you reserve spots in your dining hall for the team to eat together? We're going to require them to eat together. And we all said no, that we think this is, we think it's harmful for the students. They don't get to know anybody outside the teams. And we stuck together on that, and that changed. But I think that for the students to do that would have been impossible. The coach is too powerful. The team is too powerful. So in this case, it was from outside that structure, but it could be from inside, just adult leaders thinking, is this best to have it so intense? Because the more diverse your connections to other people, then the more resilient you are going to be when you leave that group. But I'm kind of pessimistic about whether it can come from within. The peer pressure, the leaders' sense of importance on the group. I don't know. I would start with the leadership.
Which is good for those of us who are leading youth to bear in mind. We not everyone finds their identity in church necessarily, but we hold some power in that. We hold some authority there.
Yeah, I think sure. I'm not up to date on it, but I think the youth groups in churches are probably far less subject to this because, kids are in school, kids are in sport, they do other things. And so that it's probably that it just doesn't, they don't seem as intense in time. And indeed, pulling, doing a retreat or something, that's, if you want to do that, you've got to do it. So I suspect that church youth groups are a mitigating power, because I just don't see them as having this kind of overarching, this is your entire life feel.
I think that's I mean, folks, feel free to chime in. I think that's probably generally right. The pressure for me would come from being an alternate voice in that whole spectrum of voices that the youth are hearing, to constantly push, and to not just plan youth programs that fill their schedules more, but to be really thoughtful and intentional about what we're asking of our youth and what we are offering to them to help mitigate some of those voices. Yeah, Lisa asked a question. As I reflect on what you listed as belonging 1, 2, 3, etc., I find myself judging that belonging 1 seems to be the healthiest option, which is the, if I'm remembering right, the symmetrical relationships that we're talking about. Is she off on that, or is she correct?
The first one is she up on it, or is that what you said?
Is she correct in her assessment that seems to be the healthiest option, the symmetrical relationships? What would you say?
Well, I wouldn't have said it, and if I didn't think it was the right thing, but you just talk to a lot of people. You do a lot of, for me, my thing is to do studies, right? I think so. I think it's the most resilient. It gives you the most resilient for the reason I mentioned, which is if it works, and it doesn't work for everybody. It doesn't work for kids who have had severe trauma and don't trust other people. But it's good in good times and it's good in bad times, and it pulls your focus of attention away from yourself. That flexibility in focus. I don't think people should be entirely focused on serving others. They also have to, when they have a need, they have to rely on other people. And when neither, ideally, people in a relationship feel sufficiently secure that there are ideally times when neither person has a need, in which case you just do something that's fun or enjoyable or beneficial to both people. And I think it's ideal if you kind of lose yourself and lose the other. So that kind of flexibility and focus of attention, I think, is just crucial, where I can focus on another person when they have a need, and I can focus on myself when I have a need and how they can help me. And we can both together focus on something else. It might be a service activity, or it might be something that benefits a third party. It might be something that's just fun, dancing or singing or whatever. You need to be able to do all three. Another whole area of research I've done is research on how doing things jointly with another person who's trusted just increases the intensity of that activity. I mean, the silliest study I ever did, but the results were really clear, was, eating food tastes better if you're with someone else, and you can focus on that food or whatever you're cooking, and not on, is it okay? Did I put enough salt in it? Did I, or how could they have done this? If you can just lose both self and others, the other activities work better and are more beneficial.
Thank you for that. We have 2 minutes left, and in the remaining 2 minutes, a final question for you. Most of those who are gathered here today are youth workers who are pouring themselves into the lives of others. How important is belonging for those in service professions? Where might those of us gathered here find their sense of belonging?
Oh, wow, that's an interesting question. So, but it's partly the very fact that people have actually studied people in service professions, and this would be an example. Nursing is another big example, and I think that people go into those fields for lots of different reasons, but the ability, the security and the sense of belonging that you yourself have allows you to focus on other people to a greater extent. But it's interesting. You're serving youth, and you're not youth, right? So having, I myself am 69 years old, and I live with 18 to 21-year-olds. And I'm kind of like, and I'm constantly having activities for them. I need to get out of there sometimes. I'm like, I need someone my own age who has nothing to do with Yale. And I think that having those other groups is just a buffer and makes your work better. Because I honestly, when you're in a service, when you're a youth leader, or when you're head of a residential college, it is what I call an asymmetrical communal relationship. You've got tremendous responsibility for them. They don't have, and oftentimes are not capable of having, the sense of responsibility to you. So you can definitely do a lot of good. You can derive a sense of purpose, but it doesn't provide your own need for the, fully for your own need for those kinds of relationships. So having other kinds of support groups is really important. I think, I make myself leave every Wednesday evening. And, it takes, and it's like, I need my, I call the NYA time. I need my non-Yale adult time. So I think that having that probably improves your ability to do the other.
Thank you for that reminder. It's always a good one to hold close to heart and to mind. Folks, that will conclude our session today. Thank you so much for coming. We invite you once again to join us on December 1st from 12 to 1:30 p.m. for Mr. Iaconelli's presentation. And Dr. Clark, thank you so much for all that you've given us today. We're very grateful.
Thanks for inviting me. Okay.
Have a good day, everyone. Take care.